episode from Your Own Pathway. This is a place where we heal, rise, and break patterns that never served us. So let's own it. So I want to begin this episode by saying that we live in a very precarious time right now. And to pretend that what's happening politically doesn't affect us, that we can stay neutral, detached, or untouched. Unfortunately, that is a privilege that many of us do not have. Especially right now, if you are a woman, if you are a person of color, if you are a therapist or a leadership consultant, or someone whose work is rooted in ethics, safety, and human impact. And especially if you live and work in communities where the consequences of these systems are not theoretical but lived. And a lot of people right now are making hard decisions, not aesthetic, but really hard decisions. So I just want to put it out there that I am someone who currently lives in an area where there is a lot of political upheaval and where there is a lot of government presence right now. So I live in the greater Twin Cities area, and I've been intentionally mindful about my presence and being mindful about how I feel and what work I should put out there or not. So this is actually my first episode of the year, and I wanted to make this episode because I know that there's so many things going on right now about moral decisions, decisions about what is acceptable and what is no longer acceptable. When you can no longer tolerate or participate in certain behaviors, or when you question morals, and I think this is a part where many of us question the morality, and when you make a decision that what, this is not right. Morality, unfortunately, can be very lonely. And choosing integrity often means choosing separation from people, from systems, from narratives that once felt safe. And so when I talk about this, I want to say that this is not just about politics. This is about values. This is about integrity. This is about what is important to you and how you choose to show up. So this episode is about this today, because this episode is to help those people who have made a decision that may be deemed unpopular, or may cause a lot of rift or even estrangement from people that they once cared about. And this episode exists to really help people who are going through this loneliness. The thing is, as we talk about your own pathway, and, we talk about the positives, the motivation, the empowerment, finding yourself and all of that, there's often the other side that people don't talk about to going on this journey, and that is loneliness. And yes, finding yourself can be very empowering and it can be very joyful, but we don't often talk enough about the grief, the isolation, and the cost that often comes when choosing consciousness. So if you're here in today's episode, you didn't become different on purpose. As a matter of fact, you probably didn't want to be different at all, because being different comes with a cost. To be different is to be questioned, to be watched, to be misunderstood, and sometimes to risk not belonging. And belonging matters. We're humans, we are creatures who long for belonging and for acceptance. And so for most of us, most people, belonging isn't optional, it's survival. So if you found yourself questioning what you were taught, what you were told to accept, or what you were expected to tolerate. It didn't happen casually. It means that you've done some deep thinking. The kind of thinking that requires slowing down, looking at the facts. Yes, I said facts, instead of repeating scripts. It's also about noticing the patterns instead of isolated events. And at some point, critical thinking stops being academic and becomes personal. What you do is you begin questioning behaviors, you begin questioning the family dynamics, the cultural norms, the workplace practices, the systems of power, and eventually a realization forms. You realize that a lot of what you were taught wasn't about safety, it was about order. Because the thing is, conformity was rewarded. I'll say that again. Conformity was rewarded. Compliance was praised. Obedience was framed as being good. So, when you start questioning real questions, you aren't just challenging ideas. What you're doing is you're challenging the conditioning and the people in power who are driving the conditioning. And this could be families, institutions, or systems that rarely appreciate that. Because questioning threatens stability, and harmful stability is often mistaken for safety. So, awakening oftentimes doesn't feel empowering at first. It feels disorienting. It feels like standing alone with information that you just cannot unsee. And that is where the cost begins. Okay, so moving on, let's talk about this. Let's talk about the social cost of herd mentality. Often, compliance and obedience are often the first expressions of herd mentality. From an early age, many people are taught that safety comes from staying in line. Like, don't question too much, don't disrupt, don't challenge, and definitely obedience becomes moralized because non compliance becomes dangerous. So, when someone stops complying quietly, the response is often not curiosity, it's blame. We've all heard this. If you had just listened, if you had just followed the rules, if you hadn't questioned, the harm itself named as harm. It's reframed as something that you deserve for stepping out of line. And this is victim blaming as social control. It often shows up everywhere, like in families, in religions, in workplaces, in cultures, in political systems, anywhere where obedience is valued more than ethics. I look at this and sometimes this looks very subtle, like at family gatherings, a quiet conversation among women. For example, I had this conversation with a cousin of mine who is an adult daughter who is in their 30s. No, there's nothing wrong about living at home or anything. And yet they felt like that they couldn't leave because they were told that they shouldn't. So, when someone asks us why don't they just move if they want to? The answer was simple. Well, their mom won't let them. And what's striking to me in this situation is that no one questions. No one questions that, and obedience is automatically assumed. Independence is treated like rebellion. And sometimes the most honest response is the unconditioned response is, oh, a laugh, not at the people, but at the realization that, wait, you're an adult and you still need permission to live. That moment right there makes others uncomfortable, not because it's cruel, but because it breaks an unspoken rule. The rule is don't question obedience. And unfortunately, this is how her mentality sustains itself through guilt, through expectation, through silence. And when someone dares names this out loud, they often pay the social price. So, moving on about the her mentality, and I think this is the cream of the crop of the episode, is the grief. The grief that nobody talks about. The grief that nobody talks about when you decide that, you know what, I'm really questioning everything that we've been told. When we think of grief, traditionally we think of death, we think the loss of a loved one, an invisible ending. But there is another kind of grief, especially through all of this, is that there's the grief of realizing that you're not the same person anymore. And it's also about the grief of outgrowing a version of yourself that once helped you belong. The grief of knowing that there's no going back, because having the awareness doesn't just add insight, it adds and it takes away things. It takes away the innocence, it takes away the simplicity, it takes away the comfort of knowing. And even if the old version of you was constrained or compliant, it still offered familiarity. So when that version of you falls away, there is that sense of loss. And yes, you may grieve the relationship that no longer fits, the conversations you can't have anymore, the ease of being understood without explaining yourself. You may even grieve the person you used to be. It's nothing dramatic, like nothing dramatic has to happen through all of this. A lot of times it's quiet, it's realization, and it's very subtle. But you know inside that something has ended. And endings, even necessary, can become sorrow. And this grief doesn't mean that you were wrong to grow, it just means that something meaningful changed. And when this grief goes unnamed, people turn it inward. They may call themselves, oh, ungrateful or too sensitive or too much. But what they're actually experiencing is mourning. And that deserves space also. So, moving on, I want to talk about, when you go through the grief and what can happen next. And that can be the temptation to shrink. And so, after the grief, another phase often appears. And this one is quiet. And it's the temptation to shrink. It's the temptation to say less, to care less, and to going back to being agreeable. Not because you change your mind, but because loneliness is exhausting. Shrinking looks like self silencing, such as avoiding topics, nodding along when something feels wrong, and it can feel protective. But shrinking doesn't bring peace. What it actually does is it brings a different type of pain, the pain of self betrayal, the exhaustion of pretending. How many of you have felt that? I know I have. The tension of knowing and acting as if you don't. Over time, though, that erosion becomes unsustainable. And the question shifts from how do I avoid conflict to What is the cost of staying silent? So, the final part about all of this is integration. And I want to remind everyone that integration is not about being fearless, it's not about belonging everywhere. It's actually about deciding to stop abandoning yourself in order to belong. It's also about discernment, meaning knowing where you can speak freely and where silence is a choice, not a betrayal. It's also accepting that alignment matters more than approval. And over time, something changes. The loneliness doesn't disappear, but what it does is it transforms. You begin recognizing others who have also left the herd. And you notice that they move differently, they tolerate nuance, and they don't punish questions. These connections are fewer, but they are real. And perhaps most importantly, integration also means accepting this truth. You cannot unsee what you've seen, and honestly, you don't need to. Because leaving the herd doesn't mean living without connection. It means choosing connection that doesn't require self erasure. And yes, while that path can be a lot quieter, it is also more honest, more grounded, more sustainable. So, in closing this episode felt heavy, and it's because it's an honest episode. If it felt lonely, it's because you're not imagining that cost. Or if you felt lonely because you decided, you know what, I'm questioning a lot of things that I've been told. And you're not imagining that cost of loneliness, of questioning, because choosing conscience over compliance is not easy. Because it is real. And if you are grieving, shrinking, or standing alone right now, I just want to say that there is nothing wrong with you. And so that is all I have for today's episode. And I hope this episode helped anyone who chooses to watch this, who decided to really forge your own path and to own it and to decide, you know what, everything that I've been taught, everything that I've learned just doesn't fit who I am anymore. So I hope this episode gave you some solace and some comfort and to help you with your journey. So, as always, this is your own pathway and own it. So, I will see you all next time and take care. Bye.